November 1942, North Africa. The screech of metal tearing through metal pierced the desert air as another American Sherman tank exploded into flames. Inside, 5 men had exactly 8 seconds to escape before the ammunition cooked off. Most didn't make it. Lieutenant James Bates pressed himself against the scorched sand, watching his 3rd tank of the week burn. The German panzer that killed it sat hull down on a ridge, 1,200 yards away a distance where it could kill with impunity while American return fire sailed uselessly overhead or slammed into the dirt. Why can't we hit them? Bates screamed to no one in particular, tears cutting through the dust on his face. Why can't we ever hit them? It was a question being asked in blood across every theater where American armor fought. And back in Detroit, Michigan, a 3-4-year-old engineer named John Shepard was about to answer it, though his solution was so radical, so seemingly impossible, that it would nearly get him fired. To understand what John Shepard created, you first need to understand the nightmare that American tank crews faced. Picture this. You're inside a Sherman tank. The commander spots an enemy panzer. He shouts coordinates to the gunner below. The gunner traverses the turret, cranking a manual wheel, sweating, muscles burning. Finally, the gun swings into position. But wait. The commander's view and the gunner's view don't quite align. Adjustment needed. More cranking. More precious seconds ticking by. Now the gunner peers through his sight. He turns elevation wheels to adjust the gun barrel up or down. But here's the killer. Literally. Every time the turret moves even slightly, every time the tank rocks over uneven ground, every time the driver shifts gears, the gun loses its aim. German tank crews called American Shermans Tommy Cookers, or Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter that boasted it lights first time, every time. Because that's what Shermans did. They lit up, first time, every time. The statistics were horrifying. In Normandy, the kill ratio in tank versus tank combat was 5 Shermans lost for every German Panther destroyed. 5 American crews, 25 men dead for every Panther kill. Against the dreaded German Tiger tank, the ratio climbed to 9-1. But it wasn't just the Sherman's thinner armor or weaker gun. British Shermans had the same specifications, yet their kill ratios were significantly better. The secret wasn't in the tank's skeleton, it was in its brain. The fire control system, the way the gun was aimed, stabilized, and fired. John Shepard wasn't supposed to be a hero. Born in 1908 to a family of Cleveland machinists, he'd grown up with oil under his fingernails and the smell of cutting metal in his lungs. While other kids played baseball, young John disassembled clocks, studied mechanical drawings, and built increasingly complex machines in his father's workshop. By 1942, he was a senior engineer at Cadillac's Tank Development Division in Detroit, one of the many automotive plants that had been converted into the arsenal of democracy. Cadillac wasn't just building tanks. They were trying to perfect them. And John Shepard had become obsessed with one catastrophic flaw. The turret. Every night, Shepard went home to his small apartment, spread military reports across his kitchen table, and read casualty statistics by lamplight. Each number was a name he'd never know, a family that would receive a telegram, a mother who'd collapse at her front door. His colleagues at Cadillac thought he was cracking under the pressure. "John, you're not responsible for every tank crew in Europe," his supervisor told him. "We build them to Army specifications. If the Army says it's good enough, it's good enough." But it wasn't good enough. Not for Shepard. The conventional wisdom in 1942 was clear. Tank turrets had to be manually traversed. Electric motors were too unreliable. Hydraulic systems were too complex. Gyroscopic stabilization was theoretically possible, but practically impossible, too heavy, too expensive, too delicate for combat conditions. Impossible was a word John Shepard had heard his entire life. It was about to become his favorite challenge. March 15th, 1943, 2:47 a.m. John Shepard sat bolt upright in bed, his heart pounding. He'd been dreaming about a naval gun turret he'd seen in a newsreel, a massive battleship weapon that remained locked on target even as the ship pitched and rolled through ocean swells. The gyroscope. But everyone said gyrostabilization was impossible for tanks. Too large, too fragile, too... Wait. Shepard threw off his covers and stumbled to his kitchen table, scattering papers in his rush to find a blank sheet. His hand shook as he began to sketch. What if you didn't stabilize the entire turret? What if you stabilized just the gun itself, independent of the turret's movement? What if you used a small gyroscope not to replace the turret traverse, but to augment it? The pencil flew across the paper. A vertical gyroscope to sense pitch, an oil-driven hydraulic system to make micro-corrections, a power traverse system that let the commander override the gunner, all working in harmony, making continuous tiny adjustments faster than any human hand could manage. At 4 a.m., he was still sketching. At 6 a.m., he was building a wooden mock-up on his kitchen floor. At 8:30 a.m., he burst into his supervisor's office at Cadillac with wild eyes, rumpled clothes, and a rolled-up blueprint under his arm. "I know how to make them stop dying," he said. His supervisor, Harold Mitchell, looked up from his coffee with a mixture of concern and annoyance. "John, you look like hell. Go home. Get some sleep." "Harold, just look at this." Shepard unrolled the blueprint across Mitchell's desk, pinning down the corners with a stapler and a coffee mug. A gyro-stabilized gun with hydraulic power traverse and a... Stop. Mitchell held up his hand. The Army already rejected gyro-stabilization. Too expensive. Too heavy. We've been over this. Ready. Wanting. That's because they were thinking about it wrong. Shepard's voice rose. Other engineers in nearby cubicles looked up from their drafting tables. Everyone's trying to stabilize the turret. I'm not stabilizing the turret. I'm stabilizing the gun independently. In the vertical plane. One axis only. The turret still traverses conventionally for horizontal aiming, but the gun barrel stays locked on target regardless of terrain. Mitchell studied the blueprint, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. This oil pump here drives the hydraulic cylinders. Tiny corrections, constantly. The gyroscope senses any deviation from the gun's aim point and tells the hydraulics to compensate. It's a closed feedback loop. The gun stays pointed where the gunner wants it, even if the tank drives over a boulder. John Mitchell's voice softened. Do you understand what you're proposing? Retooling the entire production line? Convincing the Army to rewrite their specifications? The cost alone. Harold. Shepard placed both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward. His eyes were red-rimmed, but burning with intensity. 5 Shermans for every Panther. 9 for every Tiger. That's the cost we're paying right now. In blood. The room had gone quiet. Every engineer in earshot had stopped working. Mitchell looked at the blueprint for a long moment. Then he looked up at Shepard. I'll get you a meeting with the Army Ordnance Department, he said quietly. But John, they're going to crucify you. You know that, right? This challenges everything they believe about tank design. Shepard smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a grim, determined smile. Then I'd better bring a damn good cross. May 1943. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. John Shepard stood before a horseshoe table of Army brass, his prototype blueprints pinned to a board behind him. The room smelled of cigar smoke and skepticism. Colonel Raymond Harper, head of the Army Ordnance Department's Tank Division, didn't even look up from the report in front of him. Mr. Shepard, we've reviewed your proposal. It's ambitious. Ambitious was military speak for insane. Colonel, if I could just demonstrate. The problem, Mr. Shepard, Harper interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. Is that you're proposing we halt Sherman production, our most critical armored vehicle, to install an unproven system that adds 900 pounds, costs $4,000 per unit, and requires 37 new parts that don't exist in our supply chain? Shepard felt the room closing in. Sir, the current Sherman fire control system is adequate. Harper's voice was steel. It's adequate, Mr. Shepard. Our boys are winning. They're pushing across North Africa. They'll be in Sicily by summer. Your system is a solution in search of a problem. A major at the end of the table snorted. Besides, even if this gyro Watsit worked, you think a tank crew can operate it? These aren't MIT graduates, Shepard. They're farm boys and factory workers. Shepard's jaw tightened. He thought of Lieutenant Bates in the desert, watching his tanks burn. Farm boys and factory workers. Yes, and they were dying because men in this room believed adequate was good enough. Gentlemen, a new voice cut through the tension. Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Miller, a tank commander who'd recently returned from Tunisia, stood up at the side of the room. His left hand was wrapped in bandages, burns from a Sherman fire. If I may, Harper waved impatiently. Colonel Miller, I've read Shepard's proposal. I've also watched 17 tanks in my battalion brew up in 6 weeks. Miller's voice was quiet, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut bone. 17 tanks, 85 men, most burned alive because we couldn't hit German armor before it hit us. The room went silent. Now, maybe Mr. Shepard's system works. Maybe it doesn't. But I'll tell you what, I'm willing to bet my career on finding out. Give him one field test. One. If it fails, we never speak of it again. Harper studied Miller for a long moment. The politics were delicate. Miller was a war hero, recently decorated. Dismissing him outright would look bad. One test, Harper finally said. Aberdeen Proving Ground. 2 weeks. You get 1 Sherman with your system, Mr. Shepard, and we'll compare it against a standard model in live fire exercises. If, and this is a big if, your stabilized tank outperforms, we'll consider a limited production run. Shepard's heart hammered. Thank you, sir. You won't regret. I already regret it, Harper cut him off. 2 weeks, Shepard. Don't waste our time. May 28th, 1943. Maryland. The modified Sherman sat in the Proving Grounds maintenance bay, looking like every other M4 from the outside. But inside, John Shepard's dream or nightmare was about to face reality. He'd worked 96 hours straight getting the prototype ready. The gyroscope was mounted, the hydraulic lines installed, the power traverse system integrated. On paper, it was perfect. But paper didn't account for the million things that could go wrong. She's a beauty, said Sergeant Tom Kowalski, the test gunner assigned to the demonstration. He was a compact man with grease-stained hands and a face that had seen too much combat. Though I got to admit, Mr. Shepard, this is the strangest cockpit I've ever sat in. Shepard climbed into the turret beside him. The key is, you don't fight the system. The gyroscope keeps the gun on target. You just aim, and the stabilizer does the rest. Even while moving, especially while moving. That's the whole point. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Army observers, ordnance officials, and Colonel Harper, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The test was simple but brutal. Both tanks, the modified Sherman and a standard model, would engage targets at various ranges while moving at 15 miles per hour across rough terrain. First tank to score 3 hits won. Lieutenant Colonel Miller approached Shepard as he climbed out of the prototype. Nervous? Terrified, Shepard admitted. Miller smiled grimly. Good. Means you're sane. He paused. I've seen a lot of good men die in Shermans, Shepard. If this works, you'll save thousands of lives. If it doesn't, he shrugged. Well, at least you tried. The test began. The standard Sherman went first, rumbling across the test range. At the 800-yard marker, it fired. Miss. Adjusted. Fired again. Miss. On the 3rd shot, it finally struck the target, a stationary mock-up of a German Panzer. Respectable, but not impressive. Then it was the prototype's turn. Sergeant Kowalski settled into the gunner's seat, activated the gyro stabilizer, and gave Shepard a thumbs up. The tank lurched forward, engine roaring. At 600 yards, Kowalski acquired the target. The gyroscope hummed, the turret swung smoothly into position. Kowalski's finger hovered over the firing button. And then, Disaster. The hydraulic system let out a sound like a dying animal, a high-pitched screech that made everyone wince. Black fluid began spraying from a ruptured line near the gun mount. The turret jerked violently left, then froze. Inside the tank, Kowalski fought the controls. "Mr. Shepard, the stabilizer's locked up. I can't." Smoke began pouring from the hydraulic pump. "Shut it down," Shepard screamed. "Kill the power. Now." The tank lurched to a stop. Kowalski scrambled out of the turret, followed by the driver and the rest of the crew. Shepard was last, his hands black with hydraulic fluid, his face pale. Colonel Harper was already walking back to his staff car. The demonstration was over. The dream was dead. 3 hours later, John Shepard sat alone in the Proving Grounds machine shop, staring at the ruptured hydraulic line. The failure was obvious now, a manufacturing defect in one of the fittings. Something that shouldn't have made it past quality control. A fluke, a 1 in 1,000 mistake. It might as well have been a bullet through his heart. The door opened. Lieutenant Colonel Miller walked in, still in his dress uniform. "They're shutting down the program," Miller said without preamble. "Harper's writing his report tonight. By Monday, this'll be officially dead." Shepard didn't look up. "I know." "Here's the thing, though." Miller pulled up a chair. "I don't think Harper's wrong because he's stupid. I think he's wrong because he's afraid." That got Shepard's attention. Afraid? Afraid of change. Afraid of taking a risk. Afraid that if this fails in combat, it'll be on his head. Miller leaned forward. "But I'm not afraid, Shepard. You know why?" Shepard shook his head. "Because I've already watched good men die. I've already seen what adequate gets us. So I'm going to tell you something, and you didn't hear it from me." Miller's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm rotating back to England in 2 weeks. My battalion's getting 30 new Shermans for the Italian campaign. Now, officially, those tanks are coming straight from the factory. Standard configuration. But if, hypothetically, a civilian engineer happened to show up at our depot with some experimental equipment, and if that equipment happened to get installed on a few tanks before they shipped out, well, paperwork gets lost in wartime. You understand?" Shepard's eyes widened. "That's completely unauthorized. If it fails in combat, then I take the fall. Not you. Not Cadillac. Me." Miller stood up. "But if it works, Shepard, we'll have proof. Real combat data. The kind of evidence even Harper can't ignore. They could court-martial you." "They could," Miller smiled. "But I didn't survive Tunisia just to play it safe. So here's my question. Can you fix this system? Can you make it combat ready?" Shepard looked at the broken hydraulic line in his hands. Then he thought of Lieutenant Bates in the desert, the burning tanks, the statistics that haunted his dreams. He stood up. "Give me 10 days, he said. "I'll give you the most accurate tank in the European theater." Miller extended his hand. 10 days. "After that, we're going to find out if you're a genius or if we're both getting court-martialed." They shook hands. Neither man knew it yet, but that handshake would change the course of armored warfare forever. June 1943. A supply depot outside Portsmouth, England. John Shepard worked by flashlight in the belly of a Sherman tank, his hands moving with desperate precision. Around him, 3 other modified tanks sat in various stages of completion. They had 6 days left before Miller's battalion shipped to Italy. 6 days to install, test, and debug a system that the U.S. Army had officially rejected. "Mr. Shepard?" A young corporal poked his head into the turret. "Colonel Miller wants to see you. Says it's urgent." Shepard climbed out, wiping hydraulic fluid from his hands. He found Miller in the depot's office, staring at a map of Italy. "We're moving up the schedule," Miller said without looking up. "Battalion ships out in 4 days, not 6. Can you be ready?" Shepard's stomach dropped. 4 days? "Colonel, I've only completed 2 tanks. I need time to test." "You'll test them in combat." Miller finally met his eyes. "I know it's not ideal, Shepard, but intel says the Germans are reinforcing their positions near Salerno. If we wait, we lose our window." And if the stabilizers fail in combat, then men die, same as they're dying now. Miller's voice was flat, pragmatic. Difference is, with your system, maybe fewer of them die. Maybe we finally hit back harder than they hit us. Shepard looked at the map, at the tiny town of Salerno circled in red. Somewhere near that circle, tank crews were loading ammunition, writing letters home, and praying they'd live through what was coming. "I'll have 4 tanks ready," Shepard said quietly. "I'll stake my life on it." Miller nodded. "You already have." The landing at Salerno was hell. Lieutenant Michael Chen crouched in his Sherman as German artillery pounded the beachhead. His tank, one of Shepard's 4 modified vehicles, had made it ashore intact. But barely. Around him, the Italian countryside burned. "All Razor units, this is Razor 6, Colonel Miller's voice crackled over the radio. "Push toward Hill 201. Expect heavy armor resistance. Execute." Chen keyed his mic. "Razor 3. Acknowledged." He turned to his crew. "You heard the man. Morrison, get us moving." His driver, Private Jack Morrison, put the tank in gear. As they rolled forward, Chen studied the unfamiliar controls of Shepard's stabilization system. A red toggle switch labeled gyro, a pressure gauge for the hydraulics, an instruction card taped to the turret wall. "Activate stabilizer before engagement. Trust the system." Trust the system. Easy to say when you're not the one about to get shot at. "Contact. Enemy armor. 11 o'clock. Sergeant Davis, the gunner, shouted. "Looks like a Panzer IV range. Christ, maybe 1,400 yards. 1,400 yards. In a conventional Sherman, that was suicide range. The Panzer could hit them all day while they struggled to return fire. Chen's hand hovered over the gyro switch. "Lieutenant?" Davis's voice was tight. "Orders?" Chen flipped the switch. The gyroscope spun to life with a smooth hum, completely different from the shriek at Aberdeen. The turret controls felt alive, responsive in a way he'd never experienced. "Morrison, maintain speed. Don't stop." Chen's voice was calmer than he felt. "Davis, acquire target." "Sir, we're moving." "Trust the system, Sergeant." Acquire and fire. Davis peered through his sight. The Panzer sat hull down, partially concealed by a stone wall. In a standard Sherman, hitting it while moving would be pure luck. But as Davis centered the reticle, something remarkable happened. The gun stayed locked on target. Even as Morrison drove over rocks and shell craters, even as the tank pitched and yawed, the gun barrel made tiny, constant corrections. It was like the tank itself was aiming, compensating for every bump and jostle faster than any human could react. "I've got tone," Davis whispered, almost reverent. "I've got a solid lock." Fire! The 75mm gun roared. 1,400 yards away, the Panzer IV exploded. First shot. While moving, at a range where Shermans usually couldn't hit anything, the radio exploded with chatter. "Razor 3! This is Razor 5! How the hell did you make that shot?" Razor 3. Confirm kill at 1,400 yards? Chen keyed the mic, his hands shaking with adrenaline. "Confirmed. Kill. And guys, this new system, it actually works." The next 6 hours became legend in Miller's battalion. As the American tanks pushed toward Hill 201, they encountered the German 16th Panzer Division veteran crews in superior tanks who'd been crushing Allied armor for 2 years. It should have been a massacre. Instead, it became a slaughter, but not the kind the Germans expected. Razor 4. Commanded by Lieutenant Sarah Martinez in one of the other modified Shermans, engaged 3 Panzer IVs simultaneously. While her tank maneuvered at full speed across broken ground, her gunner, Corporal James Wu, fired 8 shots in 4 minutes. 6 hits, 3 kills, 3 mobility kills. The remaining German tanks retreated. "This is impossible," Wu kept saying over the intercom. "This shouldn't be possible." But it was happening. The German crews, trained to exploit the Sherman's weakness in mobile gunnery, found themselves facing something entirely new. American tanks that could shoot accurately on the move. American guns that stayed locked on target regardless of terrain. It violated everything they knew about tank combat. At 1,500 hours, the tide of the battle shifted. A platoon of Sherman's 2 modified, 3 standard encountered 4 German Panthers in a olive grove. The Panthers opened fire first. Their superior 75mm guns capable of penetrating Sherman armor at incredible ranges. The first standard Sherman exploded immediately. The second lost its track and ground to a halt. But the 2 modified Shermans Razor 3 and Razor 6, Miller's command tank, did something the Germans had never seen before. They charged all Razor units with the new system. This is Razor 6. Miller's voice was ice-cold calm. Advance at flank speed. Fire on the move. Do not stop. I repeat, do not stop. Sir, that's suicide, someone protested. That's an order. Lieutenant Chen gripped his commander's override, watching through his vision blocks as his Sherman accelerated toward the Panther line. German shells screamed past, one so close it tore the antenna off the turret. Davis, target the second Panther from the left. Acquired. Fire. Hit. The Panther's turret ring erupted in sparks. Next target. Keep firing. The gyro stabilizer sang its deadly song. While the Sherman bucked and weaved at 25 miles per hour, the 75mm gun stayed true. Hit after hit after hit. Colonel Miller's tank, advancing on the right flank, destroyed 2 Panthers in 90 seconds, both while moving at full speed across a plowed field. The remaining Panther crew, facing an enemy they couldn't comprehend, abandoned their vehicle and fled on foot. When the smoke cleared, the Americans held Hill 201. Of the 4 Shermans with Shepard's stabilization system, all 4 survived. Of the conventional Shermans in the battalion, 9 had been destroyed. 3 days later, Colonel Miller stood in his command tent, drafting the most important report of his career. Confidential. Field test results. Experimental stabilization system. The data was impossible to ignore. Standard M. 4 Shermans in the battalion. 43% hit rate while stationary. 7% while moving. Modified Shermans with gyro stabilization. 61% hit rate while stationary. 47% while moving. 47% while moving. The modified tanks had engaged enemy armor at ranges and in conditions where conventional Shermans couldn't even dream of scoring hits. They'd fired on the move across broken terrain, through smoke, while taking fire, and they'd hit their targets nearly half the time. It wasn't just an improvement. It was a revolution. Miller's hand shook slightly as he signed the report. He was about to send this up the chain of command, a report that would reveal his unauthorized field test, potentially ending his career. But he thought of the crews who'd survived Hill 201. Lieutenant Chen, who'd made an impossible shot at 1,400 yards. Corporal Wu, who discovered what American tankers could do when they finally had the right tools. The 9 crews and standard Shermans who hadn't made it home. He sealed the report and handed it to his adjutant. Send this to Army Ordnance. Personal attention of Colonel Harper. Sir, this document admits you violated a direct order. Miller smiled grimly. I know, but sometimes you have to disobey orders to do the right thing. He paused. Make a copy. Send one to the Pentagon, and one directly to Patton. Let's make sure this doesn't get buried. 4,000 miles away in a Detroit apartment, John Shepard slept for the first time in a week, unaware that his life's work had just proven itself in blood and fire. Unaware that the telegram arriving at his door tomorrow morning would change everything. Unaware that the impossible turret he'd designed in his kitchen at 2:47 a.m. was about to become standard equipment on every American tank in Europe. The next morning, Shepard woke to pounding on his apartment door. The Western Union boy looked nervous. John Shepard? Yes? Telegram, sir. From the War Department. Shepard's hands trembled as he opened it. His first thought was court-martial. His second, was that Miller was dead. It was neither. System approved. Stop. Full production. Authorized. Stop. Recommend immediate deployment. All theaters stop. Your presence required. Washington, stop. General Dwight D. Eisenhower. John Shepard sat down heavily on his apartment steps, the telegram fluttering in his shaking hands. They'd done it. Somewhere in Italy, tank crews were climbing into Shermans that could finally fight back. Somewhere in England, factories were retooling production lines. Somewhere in the future, a future he'd helped create, thousands of men who would have died were going to live. He thought of Lieutenant Bates in the desert, screaming at the sky. Why can't we hit them? Now, finally, they could.